And I feel like as much as design is about the creative side, it's also about the selling side. It's also about being able to communicate clearly to the client what your vision is and why your vision is what it is for their space. And it's an incredibly intimate process.
Welcome to the Curious Builder Podcast. I'm Mark Williams, your host. Today I am with Julia Miller from Yond Interiors. Welcome, Julia.
Hello, Mark. How are you?
It's great to have you in.
Yeah, thank you.
It's fun because we're actually located in the studio is just southwest of Lake Harriet, and we are working on a project together on a big remodel over there.
We are.
So we're probably like half a mile away from our project.
I was going to say a couple blocks, it feels like, but I don't really know geography very well, so don't ask me.
Yeah. Well, like a lot of my not so great ideas, actually my great ideas usually come from my wife. So I met you through my wife. She followed you. She loves your work. And she introduced you and said, hey, you really need to work with Julia and Yond on some of your future projects. And boom, here we are.
Made it happen.
6 months later. So thank you, honey. Best design decision you've made in a while. Yeah, you still haven't even met her.
I haven't.
Well,
so take this as the opportunity.
It was funny because I think that was coming out of post-COVID, the second wave. And I remember running with my kids one day. And it was like the day after we did our first Zoom interview.
Yeah.
And you were running the opposite. You were training for Twin Cities Marathon?
Grandma's, maybe.
Grandma's Marathon. Yeah, you're right. It was in the spring. Oh, because my wife did that one too.
Yep.
And so I was running with a stroller, and I obviously would not have recognized you because you were like head to toe, like wrapped around Oakley glasses. Like you were very
fully
incognito.
Covered. It was
you look
freezing, though.
You look like a Navy SEAL going to war. And you're like, Mark Williams? I'm like, uh-oh.
Oh, geez.
IRS, Social Security, what's going on here? And you're like, hey, it's Julia. I just saw you. I was like, oh, thanks for saying hi. Meanwhile, I'm wearing like neon.
I just going to say, I think you had bright orange on because I was like, oh my goodness, how is that person not dressed like I am, which is like completely covered. And yet he was just running so smoothly with a stroller.
With a stroller.
I was like, that's not me.
My motor runs a little hot. I definitely have some heat.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's funny because you know how your little kids reflect you. You actually learn a lot about your spouse and yourself through your kids.
Yeah.
And my littlest one is constantly hot all the time. I'm like, okay, you have my thermostat.
Whereas when I run, I'm like, oh my gosh, I couldn't even think about doing anything else, let alone push a stroller or deal with anybody else.
I think it was funny. And this is the point of the podcast. We're just going to talk about running the whole time.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I like to run.
But it was funny because just to pick this up is when we saw you up at Grandma's, and I remember because you ran with your brother-in-law, is that right?
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah.
And didn't we make a joke like you liked the training, but you didn't like the race?
Exactly.
And we talked about you maybe just running north instead of south to Duluth because you like...
Totally. I just, right. I don't need the whole crowd. I don't need the whole thing. I just want to run the race, but not with other people necessarily.
Yeah. So next time,
I'm not competitive in that way.
There was a guy in the paper. I think he's done it for like 4 or 5 years in a row, right?
He did it like both ways.
He does a double.
He starts a couple hours ahead of the start time, runs from Duluth to the start point, and then runs from the starting point back to Duluth.
Yeah. So I think he was training for a 100-miler. So that obviously that's a 50-miler, roughly 52-miler, right?
Yeah.
And so, but he was training for 100, I believe, was in the paper, and he's done it for a number of years. It sounds like he gets
he's a better person than me. Whoever he is, if you're listening to this,
you're awesome.
You're pretty great.
Bring him on the podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because this is a running podcast.
Yeah, running a podcast now. Okay. Wow. This welcome. I hope you like running. If not, well, stay tuned. We're going to get to some cool stuff. So, Julia, tell our audience, tell me everything. Tell me how did you get started in design? I do not know the answer to this question.
Oh man. Okay. I'll give the short and sweet version. So I was a clinical social worker for I think about 12 years. I worked in the federal system. I studied mostly like psychotic disorders, and I had like a special interest in community-based clinical work. So I have my MSW, I have a clinical license, and then practiced.
What is that, MSW?
Master's in Social Work.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, exactly. So I was on a career track, you could say, in my clinical work. I had a federal job, was super stable, but I also had my second kid when I turned 35, which was now about 5 years ago. And I don't know, I feel like other moms out there have told me when they hear my story that it's similar for them, that second kid kind of like triggers a whole new way of thinking in your mind. I don't know. For me, it was like, oh man, I have so much more responsibility, but also I feel like time is moving so much faster. And so that kind of like mind shift was happening at the same time that my husband and I were doing a big remodel on our house, our personal house. Just it was coincidental. And I did all the design work for that. And then I started an Instagram because I personally loved watching everybody do their own home remodels. Sure. And none of my immediate family lives local. My husband's family is all local. But it was like just a way to show people
what you were doing.
what we were doing, and it was fun. And that kind of grew and grew and grew. And that's honestly where I felt like I got kind of at least the taste of the opportunity to change careers. I was like, okay, this is going well. I feel like I'm really enjoying this whole process. And other people seem to be enjoying it as well. And so it was in the back of my mind, always that like design was obviously something I was super interested and passionate about. But being a social worker, I felt like my vocation was pretty, I don't know, my vocational calling was pretty strong. So anyway, so I had my second kid. We were doing this remodel. I was getting kind of this growing Instagram following. And then when the project was done, Kelly Keegan's from Minneapolis Magazine.
She's a writer for MSP, right?
Yes.
Yep.
She randomly contacted me.
Wow.
And she said, hey, we found out about your project and we think it would be a good fit for MSP Mag, but we also think it would be a good fit for Better Homes. And so she said, can I come and talk to you about it? And I was like, hey, okay. So in all honesty, it was that moment. And then
what year was this?
Like 2019.
Okay.
2018, 2019. And honestly, that was like, okay, I think I could do this. If I wanted to make a career change, I have the confidence. Like if my project can get published, that was what I needed. And also concurrent with that, there was a local design firm that reached out to see if I was interested in working for them.
Oh, wow.
And so I was like, okay, I think I could do this. So I side hustled it for a while.
They want to publish you, they want to hire you, and you're like, wow.
Okay.
Okay.
But honestly, I think I feel like the universe knew I needed that level of sign to transition out of what I felt like was my life calling. But I also too mentioned, the birth of my second child, because I feel like for me, it was like this like shift of like, I could be in this career for the rest of my life, but like life is short. I have a lot of interests. I love design. And if I'm ever going to make the change, like now feels like the time. And also it was like a very personal endeavor, like an investment in what my life experience was. I feel like when you have kids, your whole life can easily revolve around your kids and easily become consumed with just being a parent. And it was clear to me that, I didn't want to have regrets either. And so I side hustled design. I started taking clients like pretty much immediately. So 2019.
Were people reaching out to you on Instagram?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, so I got a pretty quick...
Mostly locally here in Minneapolis?
No, and that ties into something else we might talk about. But a couple of my first clients were outside of Minneapolis.
Okay.
And I think that's where the Instagram reach really helped too, because obviously that's nationwide interest. But yeah, so 2019 was my year of yes. I said no. I'd never said no.
That's
I just
funny.
said
When the
yes
kids have
to
a birthday,
everything.
we do a yes day.
Oh.
But it turns out you had a yes year.
I had a yes year. I had a whole yes year. And that meant that I did everything. I did everything from lighting selections to smaller furnishing selections to some bigger remodels. But basically, I was still working at my other job.
So
and
this is
doing
your
this
trial
at
by
night.
fire, because you're taking everything on.
Yeah.
You're balancing it all.
Yes.
You're running a business. You're
Yes.
designing.
I have a 4-month-old.
Oh, wow. And a 4-month-old. Yeah. So midnight feedings, and you're scrolling through like,
Exactly.
which tile to pick.
I'm putting
Yeah.
together presentations.
Okay.
But it was rapid fire. And I think it was a really good way for me to feel like I could dabble. And also like I knew I had to build a business if it was going to be successful. So I was also on the side hiring a lawyer to write a contract. I hired a CPA at that point. I hired a bookkeeper. Like I did all
So you
of
did that all right away?
Yes.
On day one, or like
Yes. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Well, like
if you can't see this, go to our YouTube channel or the website, because we just got a knuckle bump. That's impressive, like thought process.
But also keep in mind, I come from a background where like diligence in the details is required. Like at that point I was used to medical level documentation about pretty much everything that was happening in the clients' lives that I worked with. And so I was very used to kind of, documenting and collecting information one way.
That's interesting. As a quick side note, just because we've worked, we're only a couple months, we're a year into design, but we're only a couple months into the project of the one that we're working on currently. And one of the things that, obviously your aesthetic and your tone I was immediately attracted to just because your tone is spot on. I just love it. But what actually sealed the deal for me personally as a business owner, obviously when we do pitches to our clients, of course, they have to love the designer and feel like it's a good connection both ways. But I was impressed with your documentation. Now hearing you say that explains a lot because you are extremely detailed. And I find that a big part of my job is obviously making the right pairing. And I'm not saying that design and style is not important. Certainly it is. But one of the big things that I would say builders, and maybe I should speak for myself, that I value greatly in an architecture partner as well as a design partner is someone who's really organized. And that's not to say that I'm not organized. I appreciate the details, and my personality is not one that, while we certainly have our spreadsheets and all that kind of stuff, I appreciate other people's really diving into the details and tracking it because, as you know, a construction project or a remodel is there's so many things going on. And oftentimes we're putting out a fire, but if we don't have the fire extinguisher in this analogy or all the other things that are already documented in place, your team does such a great job of consolidating it, updating it. And it's very impressive.
Thank you. Yeah. And honestly, I feel like, when I got into this job, I also think like not having been a trained designer and never really having worked with one myself, I had no idea what the standards were. So I was able to kind of create what I felt like made me feel, the best in terms of like delivering actual valuable, products to both the builders and the clients. But also I feel like, it helped me just like create a process that works for our team. And I think that that's been, super helpful for us to now continue to improve upon that because it feels really natural and organic for us now. But I also was very keen to not be a designer who is just interested in the pretty things. Like in order for our work to be successful and for a builder to build it to our specification, we have to give them that information and specification. And so it was super important to me that we were professional from the get-go, that we could obviously do all of the pretty things, all of the, all the things you would expect a designer to do. But I also felt like it was equally as important to me on the back end that we weren't, leaving who we were now working with, our build partners or architect partners, out to dry by not being competent in our technical skills. So
How big is your team now? So you started with a CPA, a bookkeeper, and yourself. And then what was the next hire for you? And now how big is your team?
So I left my federal job, and then I pretty much right away hired like a project manager. So I knew that was the skill set I was not the best at. So with interior design, it's obviously a lot of work in terms of the selections, but then on the back end, there's tons of purchasing and tons of product management. So, if we're not working with the builder who purchases everything, we still purchase lighting and hardware and mirrors and, hooks and stuff like that. But we also do huge furnishing projects. And so those projects could be whole homes of, 5,000 items. And so that's a lot to manage. And similar to my interest in being professional, in terms of our technical, drafting skills and stuff, it was also important to me that like I had a process for how we did ordering and procurement and all of that kind of stuff. So it was pretty quick that like, I was not gonna be able to do all of that well. So I hired a project manager who also had CAD skills. Because that was the other thing I don't have is like the actual drafting capacity since I didn't go to school. And so she had kind of both of those. And we worked together for a while. And then we backfilled basically the purchasing job so that she could concentrate more on design. So then we were a team of 3. Then Laura, who had that initial position, left. And so we backfilled again. So now we're a team of 4. So it's myself. We have a senior designer, Samantha. Sarah is also a designer. I don't really like hierarchy or titles, to be honest. Yep. I feel like they're super competent and capable. So Sarah's also a designer. She's incredibly technical and she's incredibly organized. So she does a lot of like hey, Sarah, I got this idea for this island. Like, what do you think? And she'll, draw it out. But she's also like, okay, the cabinetry I think needs to line up like this. She's just like super good at space planning. So she does a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. And then we have a purchasing manager as well.
Wow. How many projects do you guys typically run at a time, or is it because clients are at different phases? You're kind of at design phases. And I mean, I know I assume it's analogous that building is hard for us because I might have 4 or 5 projects operating, but I'm bidding on 3 or 4. I might have a few in design. Is that similar to an interior designer's kind of flow and funnel of work?
Yeah, it's basically the same. So, and I think that that's where we're getting now is my time is being stretched more and more away from kind of the design part of the business, which is sad for me, but also kind of invigorating because I get to do stuff like this. But we have at the current moment, I believe 21 active projects.
Oh my.
But they're all in different stages.
Phases. So it sounds really impressive when you're like 21.
Yeah, it just means we're tired.
Yeah.
That's just what that means.
This episode is brought to you by the Scout Guide Minneapolis. The Scout Guide is a curated guide of Twin Cities' hottest spots, companies, people, venues, and events, focusing on all things local and small business. When you pick up their magazine, it just feels different. You open up the ads and they're not just, the team in front of the building with your normal photo. It's vibrant, it's unique. It might even be set in a completely unusual setting, something that catches your eye and not only tells the story in a picture, but lets you know that that's a company that you want to go visit. Look for something different this year. Pick up the Scout Guide. You won't be disappointed. And if you're looking for advertising, I'd highly recommend it. They have an incredible social push. One thing that I was really interested in is that they will go to your events. They will go to your place of business. They will ask you questions that they then post on their feeds, and they have quite a following. Find them on social media platforms at the Scout Guide Minneapolis. This episode is brought to you by Pella Northland. For 19.5 years, I've been building homes, and 95% of all of my homes have used Pella windows. I couldn't be happier to call them a partner in our builds and our remodels. Whether you're an architect, a designer, or a remodeler, I'd highly recommend Pella windows. They can fit old homes, new homes, reclaimed, commercial, and really everything in between. Pella is a company that we trust and that we recommend to our clients. Additionally, in management, Peter and Ed have just been absolute fantastic people to work with, as well as mentors to me personally. So when it comes time to look for a window, I'd highly recommend Pella Windows. Find more at pellanorthland.com. Also, if you're interested, you can hear episode 1 where I interview Peter and Ed together for a great listen on business and Pella Windows.
No, but some of them, some of them are waiting on a sofa, and we don't close a project. We don't stop communication. We don't stop checking in until the punch list is done. And that punch list sometimes could be just the sofas waiting to get delivered, or, I don't know, the punch list for the contractors waiting to get done. So we have several projects, I would say maybe 2 to 4 in that not really active, but active stage. And then we pretty much try to take on a small amount of projects in the design phase at one time, because the design work for us is obviously the heaviest, kind of commitment of our time. So I would say we actively have maybe between 2 to 6 projects in design phase. And again, our projects vary in scope and scale as well. So we tend to do larger projects now, but in full honesty, if a client comes to us and they're a perfect fit and they just have a kitchen, but they're awesome and they're fun and they have the same vision as us for what they want, we'll totally do that too.
Right.
So we're doing less and less of those, but I always leave room in our schedule for what we say is like creative magic. So if someone comes to us and they have a small project, but they're great, we'd still totally consider working with them. Right. So some of them are full homes, new construction. Some of them are remodels that we're working on. And some of them are smaller projects or furnishing only where we don't have a contractor partner. And we're kind of managing all of that.
It seems like, especially with Instagram and social media channels, I know we had brought someone else on that had designed other parts of the country. In Minnesota, I think we're celebrating our 75th anniversary for like the Parade of Homes, which is the oldest in the country, actually.
Oh,
and so, which is really neat. And the builders have long time had a lot of not power, but just influence, because the building group was very talented,
super strong,
and you have this long history of it, right? And obviously, design is so much more forward than it was 75 years ago, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And anyway, where I was going with this is, I feel like that model's changing a little bit, because you obviously now see, we kind of joke about this, right? And people come and they'll show you your Pinterest board and they've got 20,000 photos, and you're like, and I was joking with Carl, one of our architects, right? Like sometimes I wonder if the artistry and the vision is sometimes compromised, because the clients have such an idea of what they want. In some ways it can be helpful because it does in a few pictures illustrate, well, in a lot of pictures illustrate what they want.
Right.
But it also sometimes blunts the
creativity.
The creativity of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so speak a little bit to that as far as how are you seeing clients come to you versus, let's say, a builder or an architect bringing you in?
Yeah, and I appreciate the question actually, because I do feel like that is something that we actively can, kind of deal with, because we, first of all, never want to just copy someone else's work. So if a client comes to us and they say, I want this kitchen, that to us doesn't feel, right or ethical in a couple of ways. But also, we are, our studio is a creative studio full of creatives with great ideas. And so it's also, I have to protect myself and my staff and get, kind of seek projects that allow us to do our best work. And so, it's a tension sometimes between giving the client what they want or what they think they want, and delivering to them what you would like for their, for their home and space. And it is a dance. I mean, it's definitely, can be tricky sometimes, but the way that I personally approach it, is that, we encourage clients at the front end to give us all of the images or all of the ideas. Sometimes, we have clients that don't use Pinterest, but they're like, here's this handful of rocks, this is kind of what I want.
But I kind of like that. I would actually really enjoy that.
Yeah, it was really fun. Right. But he's like, I don't use the computer much and I have no interest in Pinterest, but I want my house to feel like this.
That's
and we're like,
cool.
okay, cool. But then we have some people that have been working and saving for years and have mountains of inspiration. And so we ask them at the beginning to send us all of that, because it really does help. It really helps us see what their vision is. And often before we take a client, I really am trying to also investigate some of that ahead of time, because as much as we want the project that's perfect for us, they should feel like we're the perfect fit for them too. And I want to be able to, to know that I can actively execute what they're looking for, if not better.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so we get around that by both asking for that information ahead of time. So, it's not like they're hiding it from us. But also too, then what we do is we take that information and ideas that we have and combine it into what we call like a design concept phase. So it's like a storytelling phase. It's a phase where we show images and ideas, and you participated in one of these with our shared client right now. But it's basically us testing ideas as well and seeing what they might be receptive to and what they might not be. But usually at that phase is kind of where we get clients to move away from what might be in their heads exclusively. Because I heard the phrase one time that, if your kid comes to you and says, this is a beautiful landscape I made, I just want you to draw a tree, but I know it needs the sky. And you don't draw the sky for them, it's like, well, then you just gave them what they wanted. But, our job, I think, is to expand what people think they want. And so we do that carefully and thoughtfully and respectfully through a very tried and trusted process.
I can say it's funny, and I guess I'm not somebody that holds my cards. I think I'd be a terrible poker player. So if anyone wants to earn money, you should probably invite me to your poker game, because I would probably lose a lot of it. I don't have a great poker face. I used to have
no, it's true.
I had a former office manager, and that guy could not hide anything. You could just see it immediately. And we joke that neither one of us, would ever be invited to poker night, because, well, actually, we probably should be invited to poker night. But anyway, where I go with this is like when you're doing your pitch, and showing it, like, I get so excited. It's so hard for me not to react. Yeah. And I know it's not. Well, it's sort of, ultimately, if someone's working with me, they know I'm an emotional rainbow of colors. I've got lots of colors. Mm-hmm. And so, that's just part of the deal.
But that's the fun of it.
The emotion of it.
This should be a fun process 100%. For clients.
Yep.
Like for a lot of our clients, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Yep.
And so I feel like treating that with the respect it deserves, but also with the fun it commands, is like part of what makes this job really great.
Yeah, I get so excited about some of the things that you were pitching. I'm like, I didn't even know I liked that. I'm like, yes, please pick that. Yeah. And you're trying not to influence it, but you sort of are influencing it by how you're rating energy. Yeah. Like what I'm blanking on it. The what's the rug term again? Is it where it changes colors?
Oh, an ombre.
Ombre. Oh,
yeah.
That I really wanted that rug. Sadly, I don't think we did the ombre.
I don't think we're going to do it.
It's too expensive.
Not on this project.
But it was so amazing. So I remember seeing it for the first time. Right. Like, I had no idea I wanted that.
Well, and I think too, for us, I've learned at the beginning, I was much more cautious about, I think, kind of showing clients some of my ideas or some of the way that I would like to approach their project. just because I felt like, oh, I don't know, maybe they don't want to see it. But I've learned like that's ridiculous, first of all. But second of all, um, like so many of our clients are limited by what they see. And it's my job to make that all better and to give them our best work every time. And so, I feel like through that concepting phase, we build a lot of trust for them to then allow us to make full selections. So we work a little different in this way.
I'm glad you brought that up. So maybe I'll just give you my overview. And
yeah.
Okay,
and then I'll tell you if it's right.
Most of the designers that I've worked with in my career, I don't know the exact number, maybe 5 to 8, 10 designers, I don't know. They've all had a different process than you. Yes. And it actually makes more sense now knowing your backstory. Like you built this differently. So I want to get into the psychology behind how you do this. Because it was when you first pitched it to me, my first reaction was like, I'm not sure a client's
Mark was like, oh God.
I'm not sure a client's going to go for this.
I know.
Like it sounds like very bold. And those listening, just wait, you'll hear it.
It is.
And because like usually a design process is, you meet with them, we'll usually have a concept of the plan already drawn out so that, we know what we're designing. We'll bring in the interior designer. They'll have a match. They're like, yes, I want to work with Julia. That's great. You'll start then picking up on selections. Everyone has their own thing. Like it might be countertops first, it might be tile, lighting,
right?
Whatever.
But they're like bulk selections.
They're bulk selections, and then you refine from there. But it's kind of like this volleyball. It's like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Your approach was a little bit different. You do a little bit of that on the front end, and then you're like,
I don't talk to you.
I'm going to disappear in a cave for
like
60
3
days.
months.
Yeah, for 3 months, and then I'm going to come back.
I'm never going to talk to you.
And I'm going to nail it. And here it is. And I remember hearing that, and I remember keeping a straight face and being like,
oh shit.
Oh, I'm very curious to see how this goes.
How is this going to go?
I trusted you because I knew your aesthetic, and I think that's what it comes down to. People have to trust.
Yeah.
Walk us through how you came up with that and how is it successful? Just walk me through the process because it is very novel to me, and I'm just curious.
It is really different. It is really different, and I've learned that. But again, not knowing anything about the design industry at the beginning, it was like,
shake it up.
Yeah, this is how I'm going to work. But for me, I knew that I don't do my best work under pressure. So like if I had to go to a showroom with a client, for example, without having like a really firm idea of what I wanted them to see and how I was putting together, kind of the pieces of the puzzle, I knew I wouldn't perform my best because I would feel overwhelmed myself. I would feel not super confident in my, in my choices or my decisions. And I feel like as much as design is about the creative side, it's also about the selling side. It's also about being able to communicate clearly to the client what your vision is and why your vision is what it is for their space. And it's an incredibly intimate process. So that's where the trust is obviously super important. But I knew that I could not work like that. And also for the projects that we tend to take on, we do them to completion, I say. So there are some designers that might just do the big selections. They might just do the tile and the plumbing and those kinds of things. But we think of spaces in totality. And that's how my brain thinks too. Like I can't tell you why a polished nickel faucet on its own is the best fit if I don't know what the tile is. Right. And so for the way that I knew that I could deliver my best, most innovative work was by allowing, a really robust concept phase to happen where I got all of the information I needed to know. Like, does this client like living finishes? How do they feel about, asymmetrical arrangements? Do they have a preference around, pretty much everything and anything? I knew that by collecting that information, I would have what I needed then to kind of make the selections. And I feel like we're also a little bit unique in some ways. I think designers are definitely moving this direction, but, we don't source locally really for a lot of stuff. All of our stuff that we get is nationwide and worldwide.
You mean like
honest.
South Africa for flowing fixtures and Turkey for your sink in the
Mark
powder room?
Yeah, Mark was like, what?
I was because I love to travel, and so mainly because I've been stuck, in the child years, and we're just now getting to the point where we can, take them abroad a little bit more.
Up.
Plus, COVID happened. I don't know if you know what happened, what that was all about, but that was fun. Yeah, you couldn't go anywhere, and but so I just love. I'm so nostalgic about things that are outside the country for no other reason. That's just like it's not here.
It's a fond.
Yeah. So going back to specifically, why do you? I mean, there's certainly a lot of things are imported here that showrooms you can look at, but why did you make early on a decision like you were just going to go elsewhere for sourcing? Just more interesting, personal?
Yeah, I think honestly, when I did my own project, I found like it's pretty limiting, what's available. And I feel like, just more interesting. I don't know. I think sometimes when you source from different places too, like you get a completely different perspective on materials and, getting out of a showroom. So like even shopping at a showroom for me, honestly, is hard because I'm such like I don't know, I need to quietly think about it first before I find a place for it, if that makes sense. And so being able to shop online and being able to like really think thoroughly about things was really helpful for me. But also too, I think we don't want to create a space that's already been created.
Right. Yep.
And so by shopping worldwide, you never run out of options.
Right. And because locally people are curating things for their showrooms, it's more on trends. So you see those trends more often,
Right.
where I get it.
Right.
So one thing I learned was it in England that the threads were reversed, or what was the thread thing that we ran into?
Yeah. It was, I tried to ask Mark to put in some British faucets for us, but he didn't do it.
Turns out the threads.
Don't do it.
Turns out the threads were like, yeah, don't do that. Which I had
Turns
no
out
idea.
No warranty.
It's a little bit like the northern and southern hemisphere, where like the water drains the opposite direction in the southern hemisphere from the northern. Evidently, if you're in England or the UK buying threaded, their machines must not thread the same way.
They don't want to do it,
even though they're in North America or northern latitude. I don't get it. Okay, well we'll bring on some from England sometime. So walk us through like your design process. So you mentioned
we started there.
This need to kind of internalize and kind of self-reflect in terms of how you design in your head. Where are you getting your inspiration? I mean, is it on Instagram? Are you give your go-to? Like, how are you getting all this information? Because if you're going on, different websites, kind of your go-tos, and then I guess just walk us through like, how do you source stuff? How do you get inspired for a particular client?
Yeah, I think people are surprised at our work sometimes because they're like, it can be very varied, right? Like a lot of designers have a very specific aesthetic, and you kind of see it and you kind of know. I think our work is like that somewhat, but honestly, I'm super inspired by the client and by their house. So, most of the houses that we work on tend to be either like, historically gorgeous or architecturally significant. Or if we do new constructions as well. And so our job is to kind of build all of that in. But I honestly am inspired by kind of the origin story of the client and their house, and even by their neighborhood sometimes. So, we're lucky that the majority of our clients come to us because they want to see themselves in their house in a way that, they don't currently. And so I feel like it's my job, and where I get my inspiration from is really trying to figure out what that feeling that they want in their house is, and what moments of surprise and delight they might want to experience, so that I can kind of build that in. Like, that's why I do a robust concepting phase, is because that's how I learn and interview and listen to our clients is through that process.
Do you feel, and I was going to ask this earlier in the interview, but do you feel that your prior work, how does that translate into helping you now? You talk, was it psychiatric?
Yeah.
You could make a lot of jokes here about, it's
I was
psychiatric.
A therapist for all.
Which we had another one, actually interior designer on that was actually a psychology major. I'm like, wow, that's helpful.
Yeah.
How have you found you already mentioned the documentation, almost from a medical point of view, was helpful for organizing information. How has your previous career and training and just methodology and understanding people helped you navigate design?
Well, I think people underestimate how many interpersonal relationships are at play to make a project successful, right? It's like our relationship as a designer and a builder. Sometimes there's conflict, like you didn't want to put in my faucets.
I do everything you say.
And the faucets didn't happen, Mark.
Yeah, but was it because of me or because of the plumber? Or you couldn't get them, or were they too expensive?
Yeah, right. But at the end of the day, everything boils down to relationships. It boils down to how you treat people. It boils down to how you present yourself. And, I feel like it's all interpersonal work. It's all a team. And so I think, coming from a background where, my job was to listen and process and kind of spit back to people what they were saying and reflect back, I feel like that's a lot of what I still do. It's just obviously a very different medium, but equally as important, how you want your space that you live in every day to feel and function is super critical. And we take it super seriously. I think that's the other thing is for us, Obviously, interior designers, I think, can get a bad rap for, like I said earlier, just kind of like being interested in pillows and fabrics and stuff.
You can't see the eye rolls.
Yeah.
It's worth looking at. Those are significant eye rolls.
And I think, most interior designers aren't like that, but there is a reputation out there. And, we are super serious about our work. And I think most people would be surprised that we spend most of our time actually in the technical weed side of things, but also in the how does the space want to feel and how can these materials support what the client wants to experience? And I think that all of that work is part and parcel to what I did in the past, which is taking someone whose life or circumstances or environment aren't working for them and help in that transformational process. And it's definitely not the same, but it's the same sort of, I think, approach in so many ways, for me at least.
This episode is brought to you by Menomin Reson Timbers. Based out of Hugo, Minnesota, this talented family-owned business goes all around the country, taking down barns, reclaimed beams, and then repurposing them and putting that American spirit back into your homes, your commercial projects, your bars, your pubs. They've been in coffee shops. They've been all the way to New York and Ralph Lauren to the homes in Minnesota that we build. I couldn't be more proud to call them a partner and a proud supporter of our show as well as our building. So whether you're an architect, a designer, or a builder, I highly recommend Menomin Reson Timbers for any of your reclaimed wood uses. You can find out more about them at mrtimbers.com, as well as episode number 10, where we interview them on our podcast. This episode is brought to you by Adaptive. Adaptive is an AI software that helps you solve all your bill pay in the construction world. In construction, bill pay is quite messy. You get every single one of your subcontractors submitting different types of bills, different formats. This AI technology is able to take all that information, help you auto code it so that the days of endless hours of coding it into your software and into QuickBooks is now done much, much faster. Additionally, they're working on software that will help you with the draw process. So whether you're submitting it to a title company for payment or a client, with a click of a button, you can now initiate draws as well as tracking your lien waivers. It's been an absolute game changer for us. So if you're looking to speed up and save time, I'd highly recommend Adaptive. You can find out more about them at adaptive.build. Additionally, you can listen to Matt Calvano and I talk about their company in episode 15 on the Curious Builder podcast. No, I think that's helpful. I like that it's a different median, but a similar set of circumstances.
Yeah. And I think that in order for me to have made this career change, I could get choked up about it, but I feel like, I needed to know I could make my own meaning out of it. I needed to know that I could not only do an awesome job, have people love what we do, but I also needed to know that what I was doing was actually of value to the people who were paying us to do it. And I think that that's too where being able to come to someone with a completed selections packet really helps me feel like I've thought so much about you and I have thought so much about why these selections are what I think are the best fit for you. And it really is an emotional, I'm kind of getting choked up now, but it really is an emotional process for me.
Because it's a part of you.
Yeah. It's a creative, you're putting out some of the most vulnerable parts of who you are in that process. And so for me, I knew that in order to, I've been committed from day one to put my best work out there first. So revisions happen and clients make, choices. And sometimes actually designs get better. That does happen. But I always wanted to make an effort to always put our best foot forward every time. And in order to do that, I knew that I needed time to think about who these people that we're working with are.
I think that's a really honest approach because you understand yourself very well. I feel like, you're very mature in that sense. Especially for starting, it feels like a lot of times you have to have a company for a number of years to understand your voice. I think
midlife just does
midlife. Yeah. Oh, maybe I should have started a career because I feel like in some ways, I'm in year 19 and in some ways I feel like I'm in year 2.
Right.
Because the last couple of years for myself personally has been, I've completely not changed my identity. We've kind of certain things have never changed. But yeah, the rebranding, really, I guess, understanding who and what I am and what value I bring. I think, but that comes with maturity.
It does.
And, boys take a lot longer, and me specifically. So, I might identify as a 42-year-old, but my inner child is somewhere in his teens for sure.
But I think that's important is as much as our businesses are their own entities, and I have to remind myself frequently that I am not my business, that we are actually separate entities. You are intertwined and you're connected with your business, kind of no matter what. But I do think it is important to know, as much as what we give to our business and our clients, like what we also want out of it as humans. And I think that that's where my like life journey to this point got me, which was I could have a career doing this one thing and be relatively happy, I think. But I also am like a lot interested in a lot of stuff. So like I wanted to feel fulfilled in my life as well.
Did you have business owners or mentors or entrepreneurship around you at a young age? What made you?
No.
I'm always inspired by people, anybody. I mean, the reason I have this podcast is because I love businesses. I love people that are like, I'm going to start a business.
I'm passionate about
I'm passionate about it.
Yeah.
How did you? Because I've heard this joke before that you either you're either influenced because someone influences you to become, or you become an entrepreneur because like the other doors are closed and you're like, darn it, I'm going to do this. How would you describe your own path? Because it doesn't sound like it's either one of those.
No, it doesn't. I
You're
don't
a
think
third option that's been undiscovered by
gosh.
nature.
Wow. You heard it here first, folks. No, honestly, I come from a blue collar family. All of my family members, all of my immediate family members, my dad was a cement truck driver in the city of Chicago his whole life. My uncles are like trash men. So I grew up in a very blue collar. I grew up in this, in the Chicago area. So nobody I knew close had a business. Like it was just not kind of available to me.
Sure.
Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. My grandparents had a business. But anyway, they sold it kind of when I was young. But anyway, yeah, I don't know. I think honestly, when I was going through that kind of midlife change, getting out of social work, getting into design, I felt honestly like I wasn't good enough to work for someone else. That was like a question I had in my mind.
I'm not good enough to work for somebody else, so I'm going to start a business.
Well, I just felt like if I failed then,
it was on you.
It was on me.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, that actually kind of makes sense.
Right. Like I felt like and I think not having a design degree as much as I would have wanted to work for someone else, I had a lot of insecurities about it as well. And so I felt like I knew that if I just started my own design firm, that I could build in the support I needed to make it successful and to like have the end product I wanted. So I don't know. So I think my journey towards design and business ownership was more out of insecurity than it was out of like a desire. Yeah. Even now I'm like, oh my God, why did I this business is insane now. Like, what have I done?
It is funny to go back and, for myself, it was like 2004 and I go back, I'm like, I was 24 years old. I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh yeah, I mean, who I'm just going to build a house on a whim. Sure. $600,000 house. Sure. I'll go for it. I'm like, no idea what I was doing. Now, we won't go into my whole story now, but like the whole point of it was like now looking back, especially I think more courage or more credit to you. You had a family. I can't imagine starting a business after I already had a family.
Don't talk to my husband. Don't ask him.
He's actually coming on next.
Oh,
we're actually
guys.
We're starting something new on the Curious Builder. We're actually going to interview the spouses. Actually, that would be that would be kind of fun to do a spouses roundup.
I would say I couldn't have done it without him. And I don't mean that like woo-woo at all. In all honesty, we have we had a couple. Two of our sons, we have two sons, but they were both sick this week. He's home with them when they're sick now. He's the one that does the grocery runs. He does the school pickups. And I worked, to get to this point, obviously, it took an insane amount of time and effort. And so I feel like sometimes it's like, oh, you just arrived and it, turned out great and here you are. But I think what a lot of people don't see but experience if you're a business owner is how much it takes to get to where you are.
The hustle. People don't see the hustle.
Yeah, totally. And I hustle a lot still. And so I think, it's important to recognize him, I think specifically, at least for me, because he was the one who was like, you can do this. Of course you can. And he was probably the only person in my life at that time that could give me the courage to do it. Because he knew that like I carried the life insurance at my job. I had stable vacation. I had the ability to take time off for doctor's appointments if I needed it. And he knew by going into business ownership, all of that was going to go away. So I feel like him giving me permission to also like explore this for me was like a gift. You can't give yourself.
That is a beautiful gift, and kudos to him. What's his name?
Kenny.
Good job,
Kenny Miller.
Kenny Miller. Good job, Kenny. That's interesting. I remember somebody once gave me the permission to fail.
Yeah.
And I remember it was after that moment that I felt like my wings spread and I kind of flew.
Yeah.
Because it was like, you don't want to fail. But like someone I remember said, it's okay to fail.
Yeah.
And then of course, you self-educate, read all these books. Like, the Abraham Lincoln is one of my favorite. I think he like failed to win an election for like, he had like 20 different elections that he failed.
Right.
I should actually have it on the podcast sometime because it's actually a pretty hilarious read. And
right.
then at the very end, he's like, and the president of the United States and considered one of the best, presidents ever. You definitely have to fail. It seems like every single business owner that you'll talk to, it's not all, roses and
Instagram likes.
For sure. Exactly. In the world we live in now, just there's a lot of pros to social. I mean, we would not have met without social media.
Yeah.
Right.
It's true.
And so there are a ton of pros. If you consider being my friend a pro, that's still up for
under
debate.
consideration.
Anyway, just understanding that everyone's time is changing. I should say every generation has different things that they have to contend with.
Right. And I think too, like I was conversing on Instagram with someone that I know on Instagram. Don't know them in real life, but she was saying something like, "Oh my gosh, this is such a great space." And I was like, what you don't see are the like nearly $5,000 in samples we had to do to get to this point, or like the trial and error it took to, really nail this tile transition. And I think that that's why it's super important to me. While Instagram and having a beautiful presence is obviously like imperative to our success and, getting the word out there about what we do. But that's why I think it has to be super personal for me, is because that's like a fleeting moment. Someone scrolls past that, likes it once, and that was 3 years of my life.
It's like your wedding photos.
Yeah.
Or like your family photo, right? And you're like, oh, your beautiful family. Actually, my son was melting down before that photo shoot.
Totally.
And so because it's a moment in time, I think it's very well celebrated, but it's good to remember how difficult it is. I often will describe to people when we first meet with them and interview with them, just that, someone described it as open heart surgery, which is a little, drastic. My wife is a physician, so it's like, it's not quite the same.
Kind of, sort of.
She'd be like, it's not life-threatening, but not really. It can be if you do it wrong. Put the crowbar down, sir. But also understanding that like it's art that you're doing with a community of people. Right. You just mentioned you're an artist. I mean, you're a very creative person. There's also
but my art is only as good as it can be built. And that's what I think is the unique component of being an interior designer, right? Is like most of us don't build our work. And so that's where the technical side is crucial for me, is because I'm heavily invested in every detail coming together perfectly. But if I don't have the information to support that to my build partners, then it's my loss.
Well,
too.
on top of that, you have skill level.
Right.
So you also have the client. Hello. We have a client that we have to consider too, right?
Right.
And so to me, it's a collaborative art project.
Right.
That's difficult. I don't know that much about songwriting, but I have to believe if you have 5 people all contributing on lyrics, that's got to be impossible. Right. I mean, it seems to me like, Paul McCartney wrote or John Lennon wrote or, whoever, and then the rest kind of, I don't know how it works. I should probably speak to a musician.
Yeah, not me.
Not me. Not a musician. But it's anyway, the collaborative process. I actually enjoy it a ton because everyone kind of shares their opinion. I have often used this analogy that as a team, I think of a choir. Think of a 100-person choir singing. You can sing really loud, but Pavarotti, right? Famous tenor. Incredible voice, but he's still only one person. You give me 100 people singing, you won't even hear Pavarotti. Right. I do feel like building is a concert. I often describe myself as an analogy because evidently I don't speak in English. I only speak analogies to my clients. And
I can validate that. This is true.
People are like, wait, why is what is happening here?
It's so true.
It is. I can't stop it. But anyway, where was I going with this? That I'm a conductor of a choir. Right. I've had a number of people say, like, what do you actually do? Right. Like thinking that I would.
Why do I need a GC? Why do I even need someone 100%.
To do this? Or why, why do you charge this? Why do you charge that?
Right.
Ultimately, it's a little bit like the coach of the team. The coach of the football team is not throwing passes or catching, but obviously, you look at, some very famous coaches, they are responsible for their team being successful, or they're also they're also responsible for the team failing. And it does, unfortunately, especially when your name's on the sign.
It's strategic. I think that's the thing, is it's a lot more strategic and about positioning people to be successful. And, and that takes a lot of collaboration.
Mm-hmm. One thing that you mentioned earlier, that your first jobs were not even in Minnesota. I've noticed, just following your Instagram, of course, that, Sun Valley, Idaho, and you go to these beautiful places. Walk us through, like, how have you expanded outside the state? Some of the other architects I've had on, it seems like, maybe 30% of their work now. Minnesota has a very strong architecture
Yeah.
influence across the country, it seems like. We have very
Yes,
talented architects
we
here.
do.
And builders like myself, it's harder for us to expand beyond because I'm only as
Yeah.
good as my people.
Right.
That actually model is changing. There's a few builders I've talked to, and
I'm curious about that.
I mean, it's too early, but I mean, we're looking at Nashville, potentially of working with some local people there. And it's kind of opened up my eyes of like, oh, how would this work exactly? Because maybe is it my own limitations on what actually
think is
value I
possible.
bring, back to this thing. Like I know if I trust good people,
Right.
and if I empower them,
Right.
then ultimately I'm a figurehead or the conductor
Right.
of the orchestra is just
Exactly.
playing in a different state. But
Right.
you still need executors.
Yes.
And so I think
And trust.
it's more common for designers and architects
Yeah.
because
Our work is much more malleable in that way.
and it can be done from a distance. I mean,
Totally.
obviously
COVID taught us that.
COVID's taught us that everything can be on Zoom.
Yes.
But which is odd because this podcast, it was very important to me that all the interviews be in person.
Yeah.
And so I feel like you just get so much more emotion, and
Yes.
I like people. So,
Yeah.
I wanted to be with people, number
Mhm.
one. Number two, I really wanted to celebrate Minnesota businesses.
Yeah.
And so it was much easier. People don't have to fly in. They're already here.
That's right.
And
We
so,
are.
yeah.
So our work, across the country, I think started, because our firm started on Instagram basically as well. So like people nationwide had access to us right away. But I also think too, like our very first projects out of state, we followed the same process that we have now for those projects. And I think some of the additional work that we've gotten out in those spaces after, our initial projects have been because builders or architects feel like they want to work with us and how we handle our projects and stuff. And so there's like a dependability there that I feel like we've kind of developed in some of these communities, which has been really great. But I also think like as much as we're malleable with our aesthetic, and I think, like I said earlier, we do a lot of different styles of work. At the thread of it, you got to kind of like what you see, or you got to kind of believe that we can do it. But I think that also allowed us to attract really great clients for us right away. And, a great client for us it takes a lot of ingredients, but one of the main ones is like, aesthetic kind of like agreement, so while they may ask us to do something we've never done before, we're definitely going to filter it through the way that we think about things and, things like that are values for us, like high quality materials. And we do as much natural material as we can. We try and never dispense porcelain.
Is that why the tone, I don't know how else to describe it. And, looking on your website, doing a little research, obviously I know you, but just kind of, looking at it all again. Because, sometimes when you know someone, you think you know things,
Right.
but then you go back and you're like, especially
I
preparing
haven't
for an
seen that
interview, you're
before.
like, oh, wow, this is actually, I didn't realize that this is what I like. I've noticed that kind of the concert or the whole picture of your, like everything is very on brand for you, which I assume is deliberate and on intention, but like your website, your Instagram, your branding, but even like all the photos that you have is very tonally in sync to me.
Yes.
Is that, obviously I assume that's by design. Can you speak a little bit to that thought process behind that?
Well, and again, I think it all draws back to, kind of how we approach projects and also like how we see, the design world, I guess. But yeah, I'm like an outdoor person. I'm like, I like the natural world more than I like the unnatural world. And so I think that all comes through, right? And I think when you have a consistent palette of materials, that you get a theme kind of through your work. But I think what makes our work really enjoyable is that each client is different. So how we interpret what might be some of the same materials, looks very different because some clients want a kitchen with all really intricately detailed integrated hardware on their cabinets or something like that, which is what we love to do. But or some clients want, white oak in a different way in their house. They want it as, a side table or something like that. So, all these materials obviously are consistent, but how we use them and interpret them is very, very different based on what client we have and also where we are. So like some of our Sun Valley projects, like those are even more outdoorsy than
Right.
Minnesota. A lot of Minnesotans are.
And did I get that right? You're in a community, and that community has kind of caught fire for you. Like, hey, this designer's really got it going. We love their style, and so you've worked with other builders, the same builder, other clients. Explain to me this community thing, like, because you've done more than one in Sun Valley.
Yeah, we're working on 4. So we've done 1. We're in the process on 3 others.
Were they friends? Like, how did that blossom?
Yeah, so the first 2 that we got there were just coincidental.
Mhm.
Honestly, coincidental. They both independently found us. But then these other two that we have, and they're kind of a different brand of work for us. There are two, I hate to use the word spec houses because they're single family multi-million-dollar homes. So they're definitely not like something that you buy and repeat, I guess. You buy this house. So it's a developer, and he actually was the property manager for one of the projects we did. And he was like, hey, you just have to recreate this vibe for my houses. And so he hired us to do two of his houses.
Kudos to him. I mean, that's pretty forward thinking, because a lot of times in design, I've never been a great spec home builder, as they call them, because I tend I do things too nicely.
And same with us. And and that was part of the condition, was like, hey, we're kind of not those people. If you're just looking for really quick selections, we're gonna approach this project with the same amount of time and money that we do for our other work. Because again, for me, it's such an emotional undertaking. And also, like, we have a brand. And so, I want to keep working in Sun Valley, and I want a reputation out there that's consistent. And so, they agreed to it, and we're doing some, really interesting, fun things. We're challenging them a lot from what they've done in the past. But I think having the best compliment to me is having someone experience our work and being able to say, I don't know what it is, but I want that feeling for my own home or someone else's home. It's like you can't beat that. No. And I think that that's what ultimately builds the most trust. So these guys are like, oh my goodness, you're going to make me spend $200,000 on cabinetry. We've never done that before. And I'm like, I don't care.
To show you how out of touch I was early on in my career. I mean, I used to take photos of our homes when they were empty, when you're all done,
staged.
Right? Oh, yeah, right. But I mean, this is obviously when I'm in my young 20s. You don't know anything. There's no social media at this time. And you're just like,
thank God.
Hey, before the people move in, I got to quick. And that was before we had, people spending a lot of money on furniture and staging. And now understanding like a magazine shot. I mean, this because you stay, Kelly Keegan's is writing your story. We're doing an article with her actually this fall. And, but just like the photography, you could do the best project in the world, but shoot it terribly or not have it staged, and you shouldn't even air it.
Exactly.
And you could also have a space that architecturally is probably not, let's say you're not celebrating the house, you're celebrating that moment or that vignette or this little small spot, and it can be just incredible space.
Right. Exactly.
And so a lot of it is and then now a whole nother talent level, the photographer, the stylist. There's so much more that goes into that.
Yes.
I think that actually that'd be interesting. Sorry, I'm having a random moment. We should definitely have a photographer stylist on. That would actually be a really interesting point of view of how they make these spaces look amazing.
Yes. And it is, and that's where it's like all this teamwork comes together too. Because our work, again, like, it's obviously only as good as it can be built, right? So like you have to be able to build it and it has to be done well, but also it has to be, kind of captured with the essence that we want it to be captured, which is also why I think our work comes across as very similar, is because our approach to styling and photography is pretty consistent. And that mood that we want to create, like my car right now is full of stuff for a shoot we have tomorrow. But yeah, it's that layering process that happens that I think gets you to that final product. And it's cathartic for me to shoot a house and to capture it. It's a good closing.
It's kind of like the cherry on top. The cake has been made. You're just putting that cherry on top.
It's true. Yeah. And it's fun.
That's interesting. So right now of your clients, you have 21 clients. How many of them are client to client or client to you versus like in our relationship as a business, I brought you to meet the client?
I would say we're probably 50-50. 50-50.
Is that a good mix for you? I mean, is that...
It is, because sometimes, an architect or a builder or even a referral from a friend of a past client will come to us, and I find that it is harder to find alignment sometimes with those referrals, which sounds counterintuitive. But we approach our work pretty specifically. And I think, our aesthetic, while broad, is also fairly specific. And so we find that, kind of the referral match is often harder than the we love you, we want to work with you match.
Right. So it's no longer 2019 where we say yes to everything.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. No, we're pretty, now we're in a really great position to be able to be selective. But again, it's selective to protect my team and their creativity, but it's also selective because I know I'm not the designer for everybody. Yep. And so there are some projects now that I just know I can't deliver what they're looking for, and they deserve to have someone who can.
Isn't that funny how knowing, I mean, it's maturity, we just spoke about that, but knowing your voice, knowing who you are, knowing what you can deliver,
and what you're good at,
and being clear with that messaging is really empowering. And I
Right.
think it's respectful. I spoke on this previously with another builder on the podcast, but even like defining your time with family.
Right.
And someone in my career gave me some good advice. And hey, you can't make a dentist appointment at 9:00 on a Tuesday night. Why do clients think that they can
Right.
call you or come see? It just
Right.
doesn't work. And that being said, I had a client from out of town say, "Hey, Sunday afternoon, we're going to make an offer on property." Okay, well, that's an unusual circumstance. I'll go walk.
You got to know when to
with you.
flex.
Yeah,
but
exactly, for sure. But in general, like this is a long relationship, and
Yeah.
so
And this is my life.
yes, yep. I think it's because it's so personal that
Yeah.
people really buy into that, and that's a whole nother podcast. We don't have a whole lot of time. I just had a few more questions that I want to have to you on again because we didn't get through half of my questions, which isn't surprising. One of the things that you do on Instagram, since you had so much success there, on Sundays you do things that I like. Walk me through that thought process, because I'm going to take a few guesses because I actually don't know, and maybe as someone on social media I should know this, but like I feel like I see a lot of designers do this, and it's kind of like usually people say, hey, everything Monday through Friday is pictures of my own work, and they kind of whatever they're trying to portray there. But then on the weekends they're like, hey, here are other things that I'm interested in, almost a way to like garner attention. Or is it more of a creative outlet because it's a way of you just sharing with the world, like this is what I really like, and then people will see that you like it, and then am I on?
It's both and.
It's both and.
It's both and. I think for me, I started doing it like very, very like a long time ago because I didn't have a portfolio of work to show.
Right.
So I really had to use existing imagery, respectfully, of course, but I had to really use existing stuff to show prospective clients like what I was interested in and what I could potentially do for them. And so it first started off as like kind of that, like, hey, these are things that we are super interested in, could be good at, maybe you see yourself in some of these images. So definitely kind of like, somewhat of a marketing effort, I guess you could say. But I think also too, like we see so many images, at least in our field, where it's constant. Like we're constantly looking at the smallest of details sometimes in photos, and we're always looking, I guess, at inspiration or ideas. And I think now for me, it's less like, hey, this is what we're capable of or what we're interested in. It's more like, hey, these are things that are also important to us. So sometimes it's a quote, or sometimes it's like a place in the world that we want to visit. But I think regardless, it's creating like a multidimensional self in some ways. I like it because I feel like it helps me remember to look for things I'm not always looking for. So like as I'm scrolling, I'm like, oh my God, that's super cool. And sometimes I might pass it by because it's not relevant, but I'm like, oh, I got Sunday saves coming up. I'll save it.
So you save it, just more of a practical side of it. So you're saving, as you go throughout the week, you're saving them to a file. It literally
saves that. It's saved on Instagram. So you can use, do you know how to save on Instagram?
I do.
Yeah, okay,
I save
good.
a lot, mainly for my personal stuff. Like, hey, the next, we're going to do a cabin here at some point. And so by the time this airs, we'll be probably talking about it on Instagram. But basically, So anyway, yes, I know how saving goes. So you just save it, and then you basically.
And it's literally what I saved. Mine is pretty literal.
Yeah.
What I saved that week.
You can publish that whole thing straight out?
You have to do it one by one.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm careful with it because obviously, like, you still want to communicate a certain message, but I'm more loose with it now. Like,
This is what I like.
Right.
Well, we're at the end of time. I just have a few rapid fire questions that are the new vogue. Okay. How do you self-educate?
How do I self-educate?
Yeah. Like, are you a podcast listener? Do you listen to books? Like, what is your form? Because you're running a business. We didn't get to dive in a ton on the business, a few helpful stuff at the beginning. Are you a big podcast listener?
I'm a big listener. Yeah, because I run a lot. And so I listen a lot of podcasts, and I drive around a lot. So I love...
And podcasts over, like, I love audio books because I like the beginning and end. And recently, obviously, I have a few podcasts that I listen to. And if you're listening to this, you're at the best podcast, at least for Minnesota.
At least for this episode.
At least for this episode, obviously. But so, like, what podcasts are you into?
So there's a couple of interior design podcasts that I listen to. There's like The Business of Design. Now I'm forgetting the names of them all, but they were actually super imperative in also helping me figure out structure for how to do a business. So when I was like 2019, I was just like literally IVing as many design and business podcasts as I could because I was like, I've got one shot. I'm gonna either take
Absorb
it or
it all.
not. And so I'm going to make it. So I listen to a lot of design business podcasts. But I also listen to like a lot of long form story podcasts too. Like, I don't know, like I'm in kind of a season of listening to people who are wrongfully convicted.
That's so funny.
That kind of
Everyone
stuff.
is into crime, or there's a
Yeah. True crime.
true crime. Is,
yeah.
is
But again, it's like that old brain of mine, right? Like
Mhm.
how this happened,
Sure.
all mental health components, all that kind of stuff. But yeah,
okay. So,
podcasts.
all right, very good. If you could go back to the beginning, what advice would you give yourself in 2018 or
Oh
19?
man, I would
Which
say,
actually isn't that long ago.
No, gosh,
But it seems like a long time
it
ago.
does. It feels like a lifetime ago. I would say it's gonna be okay.
Yeah.
You know,
Just listen to Kenny. Kenny had your back.
he did. He really did. And all my friends did too. I mean, I hesitated to even tell people what I was doing because I
Right.
was just like, I just need to like create on my own. But yeah, I think I would just give myself reassurance.
Okay.
You know,
I like it.
it'll work out.
We're in the beginning stages of 23. What are you most excited about this year?
Oh man. Well, obviously a lot of projects we have coming up. I feel like 2022 was a year of heavy design work for us. And 2023, as you know, these are like multi-year projects. So
Right.
2023, especially at the end, we're capturing like some that we've been working on for 3 years.
Oh my.
Yeah.
So then it's all the photos. It's all
Yeah,
the
and-
explosion.
yeah.
It's the kind of the coming to the end of the journey.
Exactly. I was just counting. We have 6 projects in cabinetry right now, if that gives you any
Oh my,
indication
that's a
of
lot.
kind of where we're at with our lineup. But I'm super excited for that. But also, we are maybe doing a custom cabinetry line. So we're working on a
Ooh,
little
that sounds
brand
exciting.
partnership. So that's exciting. Yeah, and also the Yond Cottage. So I have a cottage
Yeah.
project that I'm working on.
Is that for your own personal home?
It'll be Airbnb.
Oh, very cute.
Mhm.
What town is it or what
It's
city?
in Schroeder. It's south of Lutzen.
Okay.
It's on the North Shore.
Very cool. Yeah, I've seen you post some stuff on it. I didn't know
Mhm.
the whole backstory on that.
Mhm.
Well, we
Mhm.
could obviously talk for another hour, but
We could.
time is up, and we'll have to have you on. You know what we should do is we should have you on 6 months from now to do a end of
Oh,
the
yeah.
job kind of.
Yeah, totally.
podcast. The
Recap.
Young Cottage will be done. Your 6 jobs will
Yes.
be done. Personally, any races coming up? And are you doing
Oh,
grandmas
yes.
again or anything
I'm
like
not
that?
doing grandmas, but I am doing the Fort Collins Marathon in
okay.
May.
Oh, very good. Well, that's
Yeah,
coming up.
I should be running right now.
You should be running.
I
Well,
should
get out of here and get running. If you liked this episode, please share it. The way that podcasts work is sharing, saving, reviewing. Please give a call out to Julia on her social media handles. Where can everyone find you right now?
And we made it easy. So
Yep.
it's yondinteriors.com and Instagram is Yond Interiors.
Very good. Well, everything will be
Email
in the
me.
show notes. Thank you for tuning in. And Julia, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Mark.
All right. Thanks for listening to the Curious Builder podcast. If you like what you listen to, please give us a 5-star rating and write us a review. It really means a lot. It's a great way for us to just understand what you like about the podcast and what we can keep doing. So like and review, and please share with your friends and family. Find out more at curiousbuilderpodcast.com.